Good evening, assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings. Good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the 4th episode of Iman and COVID. Tonight, we're going to have a very, very great discussion around sex, Islam, HIV, and COVID. I have some very, very special guests tonight, Sister Nadiah Mohajir and Sister Angelica Lindsey-Ali. Welcome, sisters.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. So we're going to have them introduce themselves and all the amazing work that they do, and I'll do myself as well. But we'll start with Sister Nadiah.
Oh, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be in company with Khadijah and Angelica today. My name is Nadiah Mohajir, and I am founder and executive director of HEART. It is a national organization that has been working alongside Muslim communities to promote sexual health education and sexual violence prevention. I live in Chicago, and I'm a mom of 3.
MashaAllah. Sister Angelica.
My name is Angelica Lindsey-Ali. I am a certified sexual health educator. I founded the Village Auntie movement, which is a global women's health movement focused on sexual health, spirituality, developing personhood. I work and have been working for the last 18 years in HIV prevention and also case management for people living with HIV/AIDS for Ebony House Incorporated, which is a behavioral health services agency located in Phoenix, Arizona.
All right. Awesome. My name is Khadijah. I am the founder of Rahma, which means reaching all HIV positive Muslims in America. And Rahma is the Arabic word for mercy. And our goal when we started was to originally address HIV and AIDS stigma in the Muslim community. But we have since branched out and worked in all faith communities and also work around prevention of female genital mutilation / cutting. And so we're here today to have a robust discussion around HIV and AIDS. As we know, World AIDS Day just ended on Tuesday. And this World AIDS Day looked different than other World AIDS Days because we had COVID. So Sister Angelica, with World AIDS Day happening on Tuesday and us dealing with the time of the COVID pandemic, how do you feel it was different than all previous years?
I think that COVID has overshadowed a lot of people's minds in terms of pandemics, but HIV is really the oldest contemporary pandemic that we've been dealing with in the United States. There have been some remarkable pharmaceutical breakthroughs. When I first started working in HIV, people were still taking cocktails. Now they're one pill that people can take. We have prophylactic medicines like PrEP. And so people think that HIV is not really a big deal. In fact, I've had people ask me, are you still doing HIV or have you shifted to COVID now that COVID is a thing? And I have to remind people that, yes, COVID is a thing. HIV is also a thing. So we saw a lot of muted celebrations here in Phoenix. I did not get the normal, fundraising requests for galas that we usually get for World AIDS Day because I think people are afraid. And people are afraid that if they focus on something like World AIDS Day, the optics of it might look like you're taking away from the urgency of COVID, when I think that both pandemics can and do exist in the same space at the same time.
Yeah, and with the attention being on COVID, we're losing a lot of focus on HIV. And people are still living with HIV, people still need medications, people still need support and, things like that. And we're finding that some of the monies that were put for this are now being taken away and put towards COVID. And people with HIV might even be more vulnerable to, COVID. Oh, you're muted. So it's just, something that we have to think about, like working with Rahma. Also people are dealing with depression now because they're isolated, right? We're not going out, we're not being social with our family or our friends, or someone might be single and not have someone in our homes. So depression is rising. People are becoming homeless, who losing their jobs, don't have access to medication or care, or to support groups that they look forward to every week. So this definitely has a different World AIDS Day. Everything's virtual. All of them are having virtual fatigue, right? Everything, webinar here. Where's the webinar right now? Webinar there. So, in this World AIDS Day, I did a couple of lives with different organizations, but it is definitely different. I miss being around people. Oh, hey, Nabila. So definitely. So how can we continue to support people who are positive with HIV during this difficult time when they're having loss of access to services? Anyone can feel free to answer that question.
I can jump in there. So one of the things that I think is important is to realize that people are suffering from screen fatigue. And also, one of the things that people don't realize is that HIV is an aging disease, right? So when I first encountered my very first person who was living with AIDS, actually, I was 8 years old. I'm 45. That was 37 years ago. I have friends who have been living with HIV for 25, 30 years. And we forget that as people age, right, this new technology and like Zoom, and we're going to have telehealth, like that is like speaking a foreign language to people. I think one of the ways that we can support people who are living with HIV during the age of COVID with telehealth and things like that is to sort of bring everything down to a really basic level. Sometimes it's not jump on a Zoom. Sometimes it's, listen, you know, Mr. Evans, open up your phone. I'm going to call you and you're going to see my face pop up on the screen. You know, this is called FaceTime. You know, we're going to have a conversation. Sometimes it's doing a drive-by, right? So, you know, taking a food box to a client and like, you know what, I'm going to drive by your house and at 8:45 and I want you to look out the window because I'm going to wave at you. You know, people, we can't have that close interaction, but understanding that the collective trauma that we're dealing with will lead people into, you know, depression. But, you know, you have to think about people who are dealing with medication regimens, people who may not have been able to see their doctor, people who cannot get those labs that they have to get regularly. So I think understanding the limitations that some people with living with HIV may have, housing has been the major issue that our clients have dealt with during this pandemic. We've had clients who have been wrongfully and illegally evicted, people who need lots of support. So I think it's really causing us to go back to that old school outreach mindset where you're meeting the people where they are and providing those ancillary support services that we may have thought, you know, have gone away. You know, everybody is focused on making everything virtual, but we really need analog solutions for helping a lot of our clients manage this pandemic.
You know what, my mom, she had to go see her doctor. And she could, how do I work this telehealth? How do I do this? And it's like, can you come help me? Because she was like, I don't know how to navigate all this. And I just want to go see the doctor. And I was like, Ubi, you cannot go see the doctor. So I'm like, sure, how to make this work and, you know, everything. And you're right, it can be challenging, especially you have someone to help you navigate and, you know, utilize that. And sometimes you don't have access to the internet. So you can't even do the appointments. You can't even go online. So
that's actually, if I can interject, that's actually one of the points that I wanted to bring up as well is to Angelica's point about getting creative. One of the challenges that we've been sort of thinking about is with the people that we work with, especially around violence prevention, is also making everything virtual may still have a safety or a privacy issue that you are raising too, right? So now we're all in the home, all together with our children, with our elders, with our whoever we live with. And, you know, depending on how big or small that space is, you're also now having to navigate privacy, especially if you are a patient that has HIV but hasn't told everyone in the family or, you know, all of that. I think that's another issue that I think you know, is something that we need to get creative around is how do we do that outreach and continue that patient education or patient, you know, outreach without compromising those safety and privacy issues as well.
There is so much stigma around HIV. I had someone that I know that they would take their medication secretly, but now with everyone being at home and everyone in your face and seeing what you're doing, it might be stigmatizing to try to go and take, because someone might see them, oh, what's that? Like, what are you taking, you know? So you're right, privacy issues is definitely a concern. And speaking of stigma, we know HIV is still stigmatized even 25, 30 years later. And now when we see now the stigma around COVID too, like people are like, oh, I don't know if you have COVID. Do you have COVID? I don't know, I'm gonna come near you. And you see the same thing with HIV. So what are some of the correlation that we are seeing outside of that in regards to stigma around HIV and COVID? If you like have any factors you've seen that kind of correlate with each other?
For me, I think very early on, I was talking to so we're directly funded by the CDC. So we have a CDC product officer that I meet with on a monthly basis. And very early on, we had a conversation about the parallels between HIV stigma and COVID stigma, like people not wanting to let someone know that they went and took a COVID test, because then you might think that, I got, the Rona, we're saying, Black communities, you might have the Rona, right? People not wanting to wear masks, people not wanting to wear condoms, people railing against, the requirement and mask mandates, and people saying, that safe sex, shouldn't be a thing. People I know who have had COVID and have survived COVID, still not wanting to tell people that they had COVID because this friend doesn't want to tell this set of friends that they've had COVID because they've heard this set of friends say, I don't care if somebody's had COVID, they're never coming back to my house. And that parallels like what we saw with HIV. So it's very interesting that both pandemics have hit women and communities of color and economically disenfranchised communities the same. Like literally the same. At the beginning of, HIV, the pandemic looked very different. It was very white, it was very gay, it was very male. COVID, when it first came out, it was, it was like, okay, well, this is like, it's something that's over there affecting those other people. But then when COVID hit stateside, where did it hit? It hit in those economically impoverished, marginalized communities and communities of color. So I think that there are lessons to be learned in the COVID-19 response from the HIV response. And one of the things that I think, and you know this well, Khadijah, like when you go to the United States Conference on AIDS, it's like they shipped all the Black people from everywhere they find
in one spot.
Like any Black person, they just ship them all to one place. It's like thousands upon thousands, and these are CDC policy officers. These are the organization leaders, and so these are the people who really took up the mantle of leadership in HIV prevention. And I think that's what also has to happen in the COVID response. It should not just be these people in the ivory towers of academia and medicine and research who are saying how to get the word out and spread awareness about COVID. We also have to let the people speak to their own people about the appropriate response.
Yeah, and speaking of people of color, like talking about COVID, one of the things I do as well is work with the COVID-19 Prevention Network. And, I'm a faith ambassador with the network. And one of my roles is to, go out and talk about COVID and what's going on and providing information and reminding people about, it's good to follow the guidelines because, we have over so many people the cases are rising I think 12 million at this point. Over and over and over here in the US. And, and over here, tired of locked up, like not locked up, but quarantined for about 9 months, 10 months now. People are getting tired of being quarantined. But at the same time, COVID is still here. And I'm hearing about vaccines coming out and people are starting, things are happening, things are changing. But, we still have to be mindful of CDC guidelines, still wearing our masks, still distancing, still being patient. It's like, it could be a test from Allah to we have to kind of keep ourselves in focus. And, if we feel healthy, that's fine. People around us might not. People that are older or more vulnerable can become sick. And if we're fine, we're curing COVID, we pass it on to somebody else, they can die. So keep things in our mind in the forefront of that. And, you mentioned that Black communities are affected, people of color the most by COVID. Why do you think that is? I mean, we know why, but
I'm just going to say this, and it's not popular, and then I'll be quiet because Nadiah knows I like to talk. I'll be quiet after this. But we have to talk about the distrust of medical systems and scientifically backed research. Let's not forget that the Tuskegee experiment, who were the field workers who were going into Tuskegee? They were members of the CDC. I went to the HIV Prevention Leadership Academy, and we had people from the CDC who talked about how they had to have an internal reckoning around their participation in such a horrific act of research-based malevolence, right? You had people who worked for the very same CDC, right, who were going out. Now, that was a different time. That was a different era. This is not the same. But that mistrust persists, that mistrust of doctors, the mistrust of needles. You have people saying, I'm not getting the vaccine, right? You have people who still won't get a chickenpox vaccine. They won't get a flu shot. And a lot of it, people will dismiss it as conspiracy theories, but no, this mistrust is rooted in something. Like it came from somewhere, a very real experience of psychological violence and torture that not just Black people, but people of color have experienced in this country. So I think that's one of the reasons why, COVID hits Black people and Latinx people and Arabs and South Asians, like it hits us hard because we're like, I ain't
messing with that.
So and that's why I think it's important that people like you and people like Nadiah and people like me are out, in the community talking about these things, because it's like, okay, I get it, I understand where you're coming from, but let me show you how this is different.
Exactly. And I mean, like, I grew up too with the mistrusted vaccine. I'm like, oh, I'm good. Like, because our community, we see our Black men going syphilis and Tuskegee, it's just like too much. And like, even with COVID right now, like if you ask me, I'm like, oh, I take no COVID vaccine. I don't know nothing about this. But I gave myself a chance to become educated and learn more about it. I think everyone should have that chance to become educated and to make their own informed decision. No one's forcing you to take a vaccine. Like, make your own informed decision, and then you can decide for yourself. Because I mean, I think at the end of the day is we all want to survive. We all want to live. We don't want COVID. Like, I've lost an uncle to COVID. I've lost people to COVID. I think we all have lost by COVID, and we're trying to beat this. So I think if we're all educated, is make our own informed decisions and work together to like protect ourselves and wear our masks and social distance, I think we can beat it. But we have to do it together. So I mean, this is a very, very important topic, to discuss and really, really talk about. But again, we're talking about stigma, and we're talking also bringing in Islam. Like, there's a really saying that says, tie your camel, right? And trust in Allah. So you can't just sit there, oh yeah, I'm gonna be fine, go outside without wearing a mask and keep living your regular life. You're not tying your camel. Tying your camel means you're wearing your mask, you follow the guidelines, and then you're trusting in Allah. You have to do both. And I think that we have to kind of follow these steps. And like, if we go back to COVID and HIV and the stigma, what can we take from our teachings or from our reflections to how do we respond or treat people who are living with a disease or an illness? How do we have compassion? Like, what does Islam tell us about caring for those who are sick?
I mean, I think our Islamic tradition, both, the verses in the Quran from the tradition of our Prophet, peace be upon him, has taught us so much about how we should treat all people, and, regardless of their lived experience or their identities, as, human beings with integrity with God. And I think, our faith tradition deeply emphasizes this concept of community care, right? And, as Angelica was talking about, the rates of COVID hitting, and you were sharing about how we all have to do this together. I think the other piece that I'm thinking about is that we live in a society here in the United States that's very individualistic, right? And that, it's like, this is about me. I don't want to do this because it's inconveniencing me. And, why should I do this for everyone else? And I think that our faith tradition has a really strong sort of emphasis on what does it look like to do something for the social good, and what does it look like to care and be a good citizen in the community and practice community care. And so I think there's tons of places that we can draw upon that tradition and kind of bring that into the conversations that we have with other Muslims about who may not be completely on board with, the COVID precautions, and sort of use that to inspire them to perhaps think about it differently.
Inshallah, hopefully that will definitely happen. Like Angelica's smile. So, those who are watching right now, please feel free to leave some comments and jump in the discussion with us. We want to hear from you. Might even feature your comment on the screen. Like, for example, Assalamualaikum, it's a great subject. So feature your comment here. So feel free to jump in, leave some comments, engage with us. We're here to speak with you, not at you. So please join us. So now let's move on to sex. Let's talk about sex, inshallah. And sex is also taboo to talk about. Sex. I know when I was a child, I was pulled from sex ed class in the 8th grade. Like, I wasn't allowed to be part of that. And kind of my work with HIV and AIDS kind of started around the concept of sex. I was working at a hospital. I was studying to be a nurse several years ago, and I met a Muslim man living with AIDS. Like, he had progressed from HIV to AIDS. And, you know, he was telling me the stigma he faced when it came to being a part of his community. And he was like, no one talks about HIV or AIDS. I was like, you know what? We didn't talk about sex. You know, you don't talk about that. So it kind of struck me and kind of like say, you know what? This has to be different. This has to change. And then my friend became positive. He was only 19 years old. I was like, okay, this is enough. We need to talk about this. So it kind of empowered me. I mean, Rahma, I mean, it didn't start then, like the word Rahma, but it kind of formulated like, okay, I want to more about HIV and AIDS. So then it kind of went off from there. But I think if we have more open discussions around sex, sexual health, you know, just prevention, all these different things, I think it really make a big difference. What do you guys think? Ladies think? These big smiles, I love it.
Go ahead, Nadiah. I've talked a lot. So you tackle this one first.
Okay. Yes. I mean, everything that you were sharing. I mean, you know, I think that there are, depending on the community, of course, we want to also acknowledge that Muslim communities are diverse in every way, right? And so, you know, depending on their cultural background, their family background, their traditions, they may or may not feel the same kind of shame or stigma to talk about sex in, you know, compared to another community, right? So I want to acknowledge that I don't want to paint anything with a broad stroke and say it's all the same in all of the different cultural and tradition faith communities. But you know, I do think that oftentimes the way that I've seen it kind of manifest in Muslim communities is, you know, really conflating the ideals of modesty and privacy around sexual health, and conflating that with like needing to feel ashamed and needing to be silent. So you can't talk about sex. That's immodest. You shouldn't talk about sex because, you know, other people are going to hear you. And, you know, sexuality is private. So don't, you know, you can't really bring it into the public space. And so, you know, I think that is where it begins. And I think it's also important to really think about the messaging that we get from very young, right? And how our parents talk about sex or don't talk about sex, have, you know, very implicit and implicit messaging that we're getting as well. So if I never hear my mom talk about sex or her body or menstruation or, you know, those kinds of topics, then I'm going to get the message that maybe this is not a topic that I can ask about or talk about publicly as well. And by publicly, I even mean just with my dad or with my brother, right? Or even with my mom. And so I think, you know, that is one of the things that we think about a lot is how that can instill like sort of an attitude from the beginning, and then can lead to other things like, for example, parents pulling their children out of sex ed classes, or you know, not having any sort of conversation, even as they become adolescents and teenagers, and, you know, start thinking about being in relationship, and, you know, not having those conversations can lead to unhealthy relationships. It can lead to uninformed decision making and all of the above. And I'd love to hear what Angelica has to say.
So I was not raised Muslim. And I think for the work that I do with sexual health, that's really a protective factor, because I was not raised in a home where I was introduced to Islam as a religion that was prudish. I was able to engage with Islam from the time I started studying at the age of 19. I was able to engage with Islam at its core. And at its core, if you look at the laws, you look at the jurisprudence, you read the ahadith, Islam is a sex-positive religion. I mean, it absolutely is a sex-positive religion. And it's not sex-positive in this modern, like, have sex wherever, whenever, however, and with whomever you want. It's sex-positive in that sex is a reward, right? There are prayers that you say, you know, before you ejaculate, before you enter your wife. You know, there are ahadith about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is our spiritual ideal. But if you really look at the ahadith, he's also our romantic ideal. How did he deal with his wives? How did he engage with his wives? All of these things are a part of our deen. So I think one of the reasons why we are ill-equipped to talk about sex is because we've reduced Islam to rules and regulations. How high up is your hijab? How short are your pants? Focusing on things like, did you make wudu? Not even how to make wudu, but did you make wudu? And I think it's interesting as an outsider in the Muslim community, meaning someone who was not raised Muslim, I look at the hypersexualization that Muslim parents inadvertently engage in from a very early age, especially with their young girls. So you see young girls who are 9 and 10 years old, African girls, African-American girls, some Mexican girls, they got booty, they got hips at 9 and 10. And what does the family do? Throw a jilbab over them. Not explaining why I'm covering you up, but, don't play with boys, don't sit like that. But you have to explain, like, why is this being done? We don't explain what the children's body parts are. I've had people tell me, well, Angelica, if you teach kids about sex, they're going to have sex. I have 4 children of my own. I was a school teacher for 15 years. I've taught hundreds of students, and inadvertently, every time you teach a child about sex, they're like, ooh, I don't want to do that. Ooh, no, because you teach them about sex, and then you also teach them about what can happen if you have unprotected sex, right? You don't start off with, the actual sex act. You start off with giving them the proper names for their genitalia. My 5-year-old can name what his body parts are, and that's important to me because if he comes to me and he says, "Mommy, somebody touched my XYZ," then I know that that's bad touch. We talk about good touch, bad touch. That's empowering for a child. In Islam, it's all about establishing a connection to our Lord, establishing a connection to our Creator. And we are created beings of our Creator. So why don't we know ourselves? And talking about sexuality, you don't have to jump into the deep end of the pool. You have to start somewhere. And I think it pains me because I'm just going to say it. Muslims have sex outside of marriage. I'm not saying I condone it. I'm not saying I encourage it. Muslims have STDs. Muslims get HIV. Muslims go on vacation and come back with syphilis and chlamydia and gonorrhea. I've seen it. And this is not to malign the Muslim community. This is to understand that we are human beings and we are prone to doing things that human beings do. So why not arm ourselves with the information to be safe and to protect ourselves, not so that we can go out and do whatever we need to do, but so that we can give, especially our young people. I cannot imagine what it's like to be 16 with TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and Clubhouse. Child, I got something new every week. I check on my I do a post check with my children every day because they are bombarded with imagery. My kids get pulled out of sex ed for the opposite reason. They get pulled out of sex ed because they're like, Mom, sometimes I just want to take the whiteboard marker and teach the class myself, right? They don't want to go to the class because they can teach the class, but that's empowering for them. And that leaves me, and they educate their peers. So I think that in the communities, because Nadiah is right, there's some communities that do an excellent job with sex education from an Islamic lens. And I think that's why Heart is so important. It's such an amazing organization because these are Muslims that you're talking to. When you come to Village Auntie's page, you send your daughter, this is a Muslim that you're talking to. We're practicing Muslims who are part of Muslim communities. But I think for those of us who don't engage in education, we're really missing the mark and doing a disservice to our communities.
I want to actually emphasize one of the points that you made about your children actually being able to teach their peers. And I think that is such a crucial aspect that I think about a lot. And it's also a part of community care, right? Being able to ask your peers who confide in you about whatever experience they're confiding you about, very critical questions, right? Are you safe? Do you feel safe? Are you being safe? And like those questions are so important for young people to ask each other and not think about it as the pink elephant in the room, especially when we think about, I remember when I was younger, I went to sex ed and my first response was, oh, Muslims don't do that, right? Like Muslims don't do that. Therefore, I don't need to listen and I won't pay attention. And then as I grew older and I was, in adolescence, I was, in college, I had friends, both Muslim and non-Muslim, that were navigating life, right? with my Muslim friends, I remember that I never once asked them, are you safe? Do you feel safe? Are you being safe? What do you need? Can I point you to resources? I didn't do any of that because the pink elephant in the room was, oh, she's a Muslim. We don't have to talk about STIs. She's a Muslim. We don't have to talk about teen pregnancy, right? When in reality, that is a misstep on my part, on my peers' part, on the part of the communities that we were part of that really wanted to ignore that sexuality can exist before marriage, right? And so for me, that's part of why I even was compelled to do the work that we do at Heart, because it's really important for me, not only for individuals to have the resources and information they need to make informed decisions, but for others to be able to support them as well, right? Because not everyone's going to have access to the same resources. So the more community we can build around that and be able to, empower others to be able to know what questions to ask and to be able to know, what local resources are in the neighborhood, so that, if there is a medical issue that you need to seek help for, where can you go that is trusted, that is safe, that you will be, treated, with humanity and integrity and compassion for the person that you are, right? And I think that, your point about that is really, really important, that it's not just for our individual kids, it's also for their peers and the people that they will be in relationship with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think sexual health education is not just about sex, right? It's about reproductive health. It's about young girls knowing that it might not be normal to have your period for 21 days out of the month, right? And when to seek help. It's knowing what type of sanitary products to use, and that certain sanitary products will not take your virginity away. Right? That's important for young boys to know, like, what's happening to their bodies, because the sexual response is often an unconscious response. So if you have a 14-year-old boy who's, my son can come to me and say, Mom, I'm growing hair down there. Is that normal? And I'm like, yeah, sure, it's normal, And so I think it also empowers our children to untangle the shame that a lot of us grew up with, culturally, being able to have these types of conversations, not only with their peers and with their siblings, but also with their parents. I tell parents, they say, well, I can never talk to my child about sex. Can you talk to them? And I said, no, I can teach you how to talk to them, but I'm not going to talk to your child. It's your child. You have to develop that kind of relationship. And it doesn't, I think when people hear sex education, they just jump off the deep end. They think you're teaching some kind of crazy stuff. It's like, no, it's also hygiene. So when people just push back, I say, okay, Islamically, what do you do when your period is over? Islamically, what do you do after you have sex? Oh, you make a ghusl. Okay, so does your child know when they're supposed to make a ghusl? You have a 16-year-old daughter. Does she know? Well, I just tell her to go take a shower. That's not a ghusl. So let's have a conversation about sexual health, because that it's also hygiene is also a part of that. You also want to, I've told parents, well, I just want to teach your child how to make sure their prayers are valid. That's my entry point. I want to make sure your daughter's prayers are valid. So in order to do that, I have to teach them about different types of discharge. I have to teach them about, all of these, different things that are just a part of being the owner of a human body, and that there's nothing shameful in that.
So like if there's a parent, for example, watching right now, like talking about, I want to talk to my child about sexual health. How can they get started? Like, what steps should they do? How can they get started with this conversation?
Go to Heart's Instagram page. That's what I felt.
So we do have a guide actually on our website on how parents can start the conversation. We do have a guide. But I would say one of the keys to that conversation is that it should be open and ongoing. And by that, I mean that I know people shy away from like, oh, I can't talk to my 3-year-old. I can't talk to my 3-year-old about this. No one's saying that you have to get into the mechanics and, get into the graphic details. There are ways to have this conversation in a developmentally appropriate way so that as your child gets older, you add more information on, right? So when they're 3, you focus on, as Angelica mentioned, anatomy and, what their body parts are. So they know that they can actually tell you when something's wrong. If somebody is inappropriately touching them, they can explicitly name where they're being inappropriately touched, right? They can also tell you if something is wrong, if something is hurting. They have the language to be able to tell you. But then also, I love to use non-sexual examples to also teach consent, right? So when there are children who are playing with a toy, and maybe they're fighting over it, or, it's mine, no, it's mine, using that kind of experience to say, hey, let's talk about what it means when your friend actually says, no, you can't have this toy right now, right? Or let's talk about what it means when your friend said, no, you can't give me a high five right now. And I think that if you build that into your conversations with your child from a very young age, those conversations can get more complex as they get older, right? So maybe when they're teens, consent is going to be about sexual activity, right? Because that is what's all around them. They're now on the internet, even. So if somebody asks them, "Can you send me a photo of yourself undressed?" Right? That's consent. That is consent education as well. So what my point is that you can do that in a way that builds off, it's ongoing, and it's developmentally appropriate to what is in their social context in that moment.
Well, thank you for sharing that information. I think that's very, very important. Even my own daughter, I teach her the proper words, for her private areas, because it's not cookie, it's not sugar, and none of this stuff. It's vagina. This is what it is. And it's important she recognizes it and she knows what her body parts are. But like you said earlier, if something happened, she's able to tell you directly what happened to what part of her body, so we're able to address that. So I wanted to kind of move on now to intimacy. As we know, with COVID, people have lost their jobs. They might be having higher rates of depression. They might be having stressors, outside stressors, or so on and so forth. And it could affect a couple in their intimacy. So during these stressful times and during COVID, how can a couple still maintain their intimacy without just getting into arguments with each other and just kind of getting negative vibes? How can we keep the intimacy going and alive and keep the healthy relationships going?
So I teach about 6 different types of 5 or 6 different types of intimacy, right? You have emotional intimacy, physical intimacy. Those are the things that we kind of expect, right? But then you have intellectual intimacy, you have spiritual intimacy, you have experiential intimacy. And I always tell couples that when one of those intimacies is either not possible or is struggling, focus on another one. So it may not be, let's have sex every night. It may not be, let's send each other sweet words. I ain't gonna send you sweet words because you're in the other room. And I don't want to have sex with you because you're working from your computer and I'm working from my computer and you smacking too loud. Why you gotta breathe so loud, brother? Right? It's stressful. So you may have to find other ways. You can switch roles for a day. If you're the one who always gets the kids started on their Zoom and makes breakfast in the morning, switch places. It's a way of introducing empathy into their relationship. Engage on a different level. Listen to a podcast together. There are all types of things that you can do, but I think the most important thing when it comes to intimacy during the age of COVID is to manage your expectations.
Yeah,
these are not normal times. You cannot have the normal expectations that you would have on a relationship, and stop weaponizing Islam. Stop weaponizing your marriage papers. You don't have a right over another person's body more than they have a right over themselves. So, stop guilting your wife or your husband into having sex with you because maybe they're not mentally there. There are a lot of people who are walking around who don't have COVID, but they have COVID's aftermath, which is mental health collapse. A lot of people who look okay, but they're not okay on the inside. And I think managing expectations around intimacy, I'm seeing more couples who are coming to me because the husband is experiencing erectile dysfunction. That can be a direct result of your shift in diet. That can be a direct result of depression. You know, I'm having couples who say, I have zero libido. Okay, sis, well, we're on month 10 of global calamity. I wonder why you have no libido. It's also the opposite. Some people are running to, you know, this hypersexual nature because they want to feel something, some kind of closeness, some kind of comfort. But in all of that, it's managing expectation, and I think communicating more, because communication is the most important aspect of intimacy. And to double back on something that Nadiah said, consent. Consent is ongoing. It's not a one-time thing. Like when you sign your nikah papers, that's not like I got you forever. No, it doesn't work like that. And consent is sexy. You know what I mean? It's something that I think is important now, because a lot of people do feel trapped in their relationships. They do feel as if they have to be best friend, co-worker, soulmate, husband. Like you know, we have people who have become surrogates for every other physical relationship we have in our lives because we can't have close contact with everyone else, and that's difficult, you know, for one person to be all of those things. I think managing expectations is extremely important.
And I also think that some people are dealing with grief. They've lost many people during COVID, and it's really affecting everything. Like, you know, and with me, for example, like we're like, I used to like always be on the go. I'm a very extroverted person. I love being around people, always on the go doing stuff. So now I'm in the house. I'm like, oh my goodness, I miss people, and you know, like I thrive off of social interaction. And so I remember my husband's face like every day. Like, you need a break and you like get some space and do some stuff. But we found to kind of like build intimacies, go for a walk. Like in the middle of our work days, go outside and go for a walk. We'll go walk around the neighborhood and just talk, take a break from all this stuff going on from Zooms and videos and stuff. And say, how's your day going? Like, what's going on? And kind of just have a conversation. And I found that very, very relaxing too, in the middle of a stressful sometimes day. So that can be something. And then sometimes people shame you, oh, you're eating all these high carbs and sugary snacks. Eat a brownie if that helps you. Eat some ice cream, eat cookies, eat whatever.
Can I tell you, I got a slice of chocolate cake, chocolate frosting. I don't even like sweets. I'm gonna smash that. As soon as this webinar is over, it's been a stressful day. I'll eat some chocolate. It's got magnesium. That's the excuse I'm giving myself. Brownie.
Yes. I mean, I made like batches of brownies last month. I'm not gonna talk about it. I just binge watched Netflix and stuff with the brownie. I was like, I just had to do it. And you know what? It's okay. We all have things that we're going through. And like, you know, so yeah, I mean, and Nadiah, I want to hear from you too. I'm talking a lot. So I want to hear from you too. Like, what are some ways you think that couples can keep their intimacy, you know, during this difficult time?
I mean, I really want to ditto everything that both of you have said, particularly around, you know, some of the intimacy conversation that Angelica just brought up about how there's different types of intimacy. And I think the media and the society and the world that we live in really just emphasizes physical intimacy. And I feel like oftentimes it's like, you know, oh, you don't want to have sex with me. And it's just like the end of the world, when in reality, there's so many different kinds of intimacy, including, you know, emotional and spiritual intimacy, that I think our Prophet, peace be upon him, first and foremost, modeled that, right? In all of his relationships. And I think that, you know, getting creative around finding how to rekindle some of that other intimacy, I think is really important. You know, I know you mentioned walking. I was going to talk about car dates. My husband and I have been going on car dates. You know, can't go to a restaurant, can't have dinner out, whatever. So just go on a car date, go for a drive. Now, I know that's hard if you have young children and you don't have childcare for them, right? In the era of COVID, it's not like you can just call a babysitter either. So, you know, it does require some creativity. What does a home date look like? What does a mini spa session or a massage session at home look like? There are other ways to sort of get that intimacy. And I can't emphasize the communication enough. I have a lot of inquiries around Ramadan, actually, when partners will come to me and say, I'm just so frustrated. One partner really wants to, you know, have the sex and I'm just so exhausted. I'm just so exhausted from fasting and from caring for the kids and, you know, whatever it is. I don't want to gender it either, because I know that it can look different. But, you know, one of the, we've written a blog post on that is just, you know, communication is so key in that, and having a conversation before Ramadan starts, right? And being like, here is what impact Ramadan has on me and why I may not feel as open to regular sexual activity that we do the rest of the year. And I know that, you know, Ramadan cannot be compared to COVID in that way, in the sense that, like, it's not a perfect comparison, but I do think that, you know, COVID, it's like one crisis after another. And I think that constant communication about how that impact of the grief, of the loss, of the economic impact, you know, of being an essential worker. The other thing I was thinking about as I was preparing for this conversation is, you know, what is it for essential workers, particularly people, healthcare workers on the front line, right? Every day in the hospital, having to see so much loss and so much grief, to have to come home to their partners, which may be a refuge and maybe, you know, a reprieve for them, but also, you know, it may not be on the top of their mind of what intimacy looks like, and just really having that clear understanding of, like, where's my partner coming from. Another example I was thinking about, I had a friend who recently shared this with me. Her husband didn't stop traveling for work. It was just the kind of job that he just had to keep traveling, even though COVID was still happening. And so that also complicates things, because now you're in this long distance relationship and you get to come home, but then you might be coming home from a city that has high numbers. And so there's, like, you know, that kind of complication too, is COVID spread. You're worried about that too.
I want to speak up too for the introverts in the house.
Yes.
Because that's me. And COVID has been really hard because everyone in my family is extroverted. Everyone. I don't like people enough to be around them all the time. Like, I like people, but I recharge when I'm in solitude. Like, that's when I recharge my batteries. And I think no communication is also a form of communication. And I think that with some couples, intimacy does not always have to be, let's talk, let's go on a date, let's do this. Sometimes it's, let me sit on my side of the room, book, let me take a nap, let me stare out the window, and not have it be an attack against you, not have it ignoring you. Because that's another thing that can put, you know, strain on relationships. And intimate relationships are not just husband-wife, right? They're mother to child, they're siblings. My children know when mommy goes in the room and closes the door, she wants alone time. I need alone time, because otherwise, you know, I'm cranky mommy. So I think that that's also something to consider when talking about intimacy, is space, you know, spatial intimacy. We can talk about that, like, and just giving each other the room to nourish within, I think, is important.
Very good. Well, I want to say this has been a really, really great conversation. I've learned so much from you all, and I'm sure the viewers have as well. We're going to transition to question and answer in about a minute or two. So I want to, for those who are watching right now, please go ahead and drop your questions into the comments, and we'll go ahead and answer them. We have about 5 to 10 minutes left on this live, so please go ahead and drop them. And also, how can people get in contact with you? So let's start with Nadiah. How can folks get in contact with you? How can you learn more about Heart and all your work?
Sure. Yeah. So it's coming up on the thing. You can email me. We have Instagram and website. So at Heart to Grow on Instagram and Facebook, and then www.hearttogrow.org.
Perfect. Thank you. And then the same for you, Angelica. How can folks follow you or get in contact with you?
So the best way to get in contact with me or to follow my work is on Instagram and Twitter. It's at Village Auntie. That's Auntie with an IE, not a Y. We also have a Facebook page, Reclaiming the Village Auntie. I do have my email link that is on my Instagram, and that goes directly to my management team.
Perfect. Thank you. And then for folks who are and then for folks who are interested in learning more about the COVID-19 Prevention Network, You can contact that by going to preventcovid.org, or you can contact me at khadijah@rahma.org, and we can talk more about COVID prevention education initiatives, and whatever you want to cater to your community, we can kind of do that for you. And also, if you're interested more about Rahma, again, khadijah@rahma.org, and also rahma.org is the website. Additionally, we did actually had a launch good, a crowdfunding campaign for Giving Tuesday and for World AIDS Day, which is this past Tuesday. So if you're interested in supporting Rahma's work, here's a launch good link here. We're trying to support and create a safe space for HIV positive Muslims and their allies. As we know, HIV is very, very stigmatized. Unfortunately, still to this day, people have felt ostracized and don't feel welcome in their community. And it's unfortunate and it needs to stop. So by you giving to our organization, you're helping us to do more educational efforts, talk to faith leaders, talk to imams, and really try to raise awareness and create a safe space for all. Also help with our work around FGM and gender-based violence. So please check it out. Donate to us if you can. Donate to Heart Women and Girls. Check out the Village Auntie. We're trying to do some really, really important work that is often very stigmatized. So we need to talk about this. Please support us. So we actually do have a question, and we will pull it up here. It's from Naima in Ramadan. Angelica, I know her.
My friend.
Friend. How does one overcome cultural barriers when it comes to talking about sex with their children? My parents never talked with me about it, and growing up and I have a hard time finding ways to speak to my children.
So I'll take a stab at this one since I know Naima. Just bring it to my house. No, I'm just joking. So there are two things I would suggest. One, so we grow up in a culture, and then when we have children in our own family, we create a new culture. So our children are really products of a third culture, our husbands' background, our background, and then they create a third culture. And I know that might seem very basic to say, but even if you're from I know Naima is Somali. Even if you come from a Somali household, every Somali household is the same, right? So you have an opportunity to establish a new culture in your family. In terms of being comfortable about talking about sex, I have to shout out the work of Dr. Shakira Abdullah, who is a doctor. She is a professor, and her focus is on abstinence education, but more importantly, her work centers around giving parents the language that they need to talk to their young children about sex. You can find her on Instagram at the Halal Sexpert. And she's young. She has a story. She has experience. I think that she does an excellent job in helping parents to frame the conversation. But the most important thing is you have to get over your shame around talking about sex. Because sometimes the children are not ashamed. They want to know. It's us that are like, oh my gosh, we're clutching our pearls. We have to let go of that, that shame that we have embedded from our cultural upbringing or whatever, in order to have the conversation. But if you're looking for a way to really have a full-fledged conversation, I highly recommend Dr. Shakira, the Halal Sexpert.
I would just add to that, sometimes, there are different ways to break the ice as well. Like, for example, if there's so many excellent videos, animated videos out there that can give this kind of language as well. So I remember there was a question that we got about how do parents talk to their children, specifically about sexual violence. And, they were very, how do we do it? We're so embarrassed. We're so ashamed, but this is information we want our kid to know. There was this really wonderful cartoon, maybe a 10-minute cartoon that was released from an Indian cartoonist in India that they were using there to raise awareness about sexual violence. And it was so well done. It was so culturally sensitive to South Asian communities. I recommended that. And that was something that they shared with me that was really the perfect tool to be able to break the ice and then start a conversation that they were nervous about with their children. Just let's watch this, 10-minute cartoon together, and then let's talk about it. And I think that, there's plenty of really great videos like that are being released all the time from all of the different kinds of culturally specific organizations as well as mainstream organizations. So there are so many great tools and books too, right? There's the one really famous one, the Keeping Up with Growing You Up or whatever. It's like made by the American Girl company.
The care of
the
you
care
or
and
something
keeping, yeah, something like that. And like even like simple books like that are just beautifully done and like have beautiful pictures. You know, if you're comfortable, read it first, just to make sure that you're comfortable with the content, and then say, hey, you know, let's read this together and start that conversation that way.
Those are some very insightful answers. We actually have more questions coming in. Oh, here's someone posted here. The Care and Keeping of You.
Yes, thank you. That is the book, yes.
And there are 2 parts to that book. See the audience? No? Okay, Tasneem, we see you. All right, so next question is from Sister Layla. So like, Sister Layla. Oh, and Naima says, actually, I got those from my daughter, and I helped her with entering puberty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sister Naima says, thank you. Okay, so Sister Layla, she says, what is one thing people can do, oh, this is heavy, to erase stigma for sexual abuse survivors?
You can't. You can't erase it. You're not going to ever erase the stigma because people are going to be people. You can minimize stigma by focusing on the perpetrators. We're good at providing, like, rushing to the aid of women and men, right? Human beings, you know, who have been victims of sexual abuse, but we never point out the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we keep them as our imam. We let that uncle keep coming over to the house, but just don't go sit on his lap. You know, we have to, I think the way that you balance the stigma for sexual abuse survivors is take the spotlight off of them and focus on these people who are out here abusing, you know, and committing treachery against other people. That's how you balance it out. You're never going to erase the stigma until you start going after these perpetrators. I mean, and in harsh ways. You know, we talk about Islam and, you know, what Islam says. What does Islam say about that? You know, what does Islam say about a rapist? What does Islam say about an abuser? Let's use that. Like, since we want to be so hardcore on what Islam says, let's look at what Islam says about people who violate other people in that way. One of the things that Village Auntie is working on is launching a nonprofit organization that will provide support for women who are survivors of spiritual and sexual abuse. But even that is difficult because we don't want to call out that it really exists, and we don't really understand what abuse is. You know, sexual abuse is rape in a dark alley. That's not, you know, that's one example. That's one extreme example. But there are so many other steps to go before you get there that we don't consider abuse. So first we have to know what abuse is, and then we have to put the spotlight and the lens on the people who are the abusers and let the survivors heal out of the public eye.
And then also, I think there's an order that started last year.
Which order?
Facing Abuse.
Mm-hmm.
FACE is an investigative organization. You know, they are the ones who go out and like send lawyers and send people out to the community to find these people who are abusers. I want to focus on not investigating and care outside of the limelight. But FACE, there's another organization whose name I can't call right now, who's doing a lot of work around rooting out these abusers in our communities.
I would just add to that and say, so Khadijah, I know that your org's name is Rahma. We actually have a framework to support survivors that's called the Responding with Rahma framework. And, you know, we intentionally chose that word as well because of how important it is in our community, in our tradition of, you know, compassion, having compassion for people, right? And also recognizing that God is the most compassionate, and how, you know, we are encouraged to sort of carry that compassion with us as well when we interact with other human beings. And so the framework that we developed is actually an acronym for Rahma on how to respond to somebody who may come to you and say, hey, this happened to me. And it's really simple. So the R is responding by listening. So it's really amazing just how empowering it can be to be heard, right? And so responding by listening. A is affirm and validate. So, and believe, right? There's a statistic out there that says something like a child has to tell 7 adults before they are believed about the abuse that they experience, right? And it's no different for adults who experience abuse. Oftentimes they're shamed, they're blamed, they're disbelieved. They're told that, how can that person do that to you? They're so religious, they're so kind, they're so generous, right? So just believing can be so empowering to a person who's experienced this. H is to honor their cultural and religious context. So really recognizing that, there are specific traditions or beliefs or worldviews that people may have, and it's not what they need in that moment for you to say, hey, that's just patriarchal, right? Or that's a real concern that they have, and honoring that worldview is really important. M is maintain privacy. It seems so easy, but it's so often compromised in our communities. Even when people think that they're talking about somebody in a way that's de-identified, our communities are so small and so tight that oftentimes people can recognize exactly who you're talking about. So just maintaining privacy. And then A is assisting with providing those resources. So, saying, I believe you, you're not alone. There are people who can help, and let me help you find them, right? Let me connect you to a therapist. Let me connect you to the rape crisis center that's in our area. Let me connect you to a lawyer, right? Like, there are different ways that people can get help, and just being able to support them in that. And that's, again, like, a couple earlier in the conversation when we talked about how important it is for peers to have this information, this is where it can get useful, right? If somebody does come to you and say, this happened to me, and, because you went to sex ed and you learned about all the different resources out there, you're now able to connect them to the people who can actually help them the most.
And, it's hard to erase stigma when it continues to happen. After I was abused, I was stalked. And it's like, no, like if you're abused and then you're stalked continually months afterwards, it's like that stigma keeps coming back and back and back. And then, is a stigma around even trying to seek help and trying to heal from that. So you're dealing with the stigma of being abused, the stigma of being stalked, and the stigma of even trying to talk about it if you want to do that. You don't have to, but trying to talk about it if you want to do that or disclose, and then trying to find support. And people are like, oh, what was you doing for that to happen to you? So many different layers I have to think about. And, even to this day, I still think about things that happened then, and I probably will for the rest of my life. But I think one thing that's helped me for sure was, talking to a therapist. Mm-hmm. Or for me, we had this thing in my school called Take Back the Night. And that's where I finally spoke out about it. And I felt like a lot of weight came off my shoulders. Like I felt a little bit more freer. But everyone has their own different experiences. And then my friends why didn't you tell us when that happened? I was like, it's kind of also bringing the shame. Like, I don't want to tell you when that happened. I don't want you to know. Like, you kind of feel shame sometimes. So we have to think about all these different aspects of talking to survivors and trying to respond with rahma to them and trying to help them, navigate this. Because I think stigma probably will last for, like you said, you can't really get rid of it when it comes to those kind of experiences. Ooh, it's getting heavy. All right, so we have another question from, Najma, your friend as well. Can you smile it? How to get our community imams/leaders to discuss such realistic topics coming from us as Muslimas? I guess I could continue on that. So with Rahma, we talk to a lot of imams because imams are like role models, right? People look up to them in the community for support, guidance, so on and so forth. So, we had a lot of doors closed, and I feel like, oh no, this doesn't happen to our community. You talk about this. But I found from the Black community, we have the most support because we know that, we know this affects our community. And I found from communities who are non-Black that have had the most resistance. But I have people who will call me who are non-Black saying, my daughter is positive. I don't know what to do. Where do I go? I don't want anybody to know. So we know that it affects all communities, and we have to have these imams, talk about it. even just having just an educational workshop or providing premarital counseling or testing or just having someone come in and talk about it. And one thing Rahma's trying to do is we're trying to create a training called Project Imam. We're focused on imams and really just kind of, because some people are really passionate about HIV, like some imams, but they might say stigmatizing words or might have outdated information and be more harmful than not. So having accurate information, providing it to our failures can really help people feel safe in their communities. Because so many people are leaving Islam, unfortunately, because they don't feel safe in their environment. So we do workshops and massages. We found some really great allies. For example, in DC, Masjid Muhammad is a great ally. We've done many workshops there. The ma'am has come and spoke at our retreats and spoken to people living with HIV and providing support. So like we found some allies, and then we go from there. You're gonna probably find people saying no, 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 but find that yes, yes, yes. Keep going, and those who say no might turn to yes. So you know what your mission is, you know what your work is. So keep going and trying to really speak the truth about different things. And in my opinion, inshallah, things start opening up, and you start doing more. People start hearing about your work, contacting you, wanting to help, and help spread the word, inshallah.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna say that we need to stop expecting imams to talk about some of this stuff and allow them to make space for us to talk about things. I'm a woman, so in 99.99% of the communities in America, I'm never going to be the imam. I don't want to be an imam, but I'm an expert in my field. I'm a subject matter expert. I have experience. Why not have the imam come out and support me, support Rahma, support Heart? Why can't the imam bring Nadiah out? I think we put too much responsibility on our imams. And I have several imams that I know personally who have endorsed my work, who have, made space in the masjid. I have to shout out Sheikh Anwar, Imam Anas, and Imam Kaiser in Philadelphia. They were the very first masjid that ever let me come in and talk and didn't say, don't say this, don't say this, don't say this. They trusted that I had the proper adab to have this conversation. And then not only did they allow me to have the conversation, they attended. So Sheikh Anwar and Imam Anas sat front row, and I was like, oh Lord, what am I doing? And they sat there and they just sit there and they're like, and they were responsive. And then a few months later, they said, well, can Sister Angelica bring this, rite to passage program to Masjid Kuba? Sheikh Mohammed Mendez is another one who's an ardent supporter from the very beginning. Ustaz Ubaidullah Evans, like these are people who are like, we need women to talk about this. Because the other thing we don't think about, whether you're talking about HIV, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, sexual health, a lot of these imams are like, I'm a man. I don't feel comfortable talking to adult women about these things. That's just a line of decorum that I'm not ready to cross. But if they would let the women take up space, we forget that women, we can't be imams, but we can be spiritual leaders. We can be community leaders. We can have other roles in the community. So instead of like holding the mic and speaking for us, pass the mic to us and let us speak for ourselves.
And, I agree with that 100%. I know, like, Masjid Muhammad, like, we went to a Jummah one time, the imam was up to the front of the Jummah, after Jummah, in front of everybody. It was like, whoa, Sister Khadijah. I was like, oh, okay. I was shocked. But I had one imam tell me, Khadijah, you should not be running Rahma. I was like, why? Because you're a woman. I was like, what?
I was supposed to make tea and babies. That's it.
I was like, what? Because I'm a woman? Like, I was so shocked that came out of his mouth. I thought he was a really strong supporter of Rahma. But he said that, you shouldn't be running this organization because you're a woman. And that really pushed me even more to keep doing the work. I was like, okay. But yeah, so I mean, I agree that we need to speak. But I also still believe that imams should be kind of educated and prepared, because someone's going to come to them and say, hey, I need support, or, this and that. They should have some kind of education or background to be able to say, hey, I got you. Here's some resources. Let me take you there. And I see someone ask me, where am I located? I'm located in the DMV, DC, Maryland, VA area. So yeah, I think definitely give us space to speak. But at the same time, I think that imams should speak too, especially when they're doing, because you have a captive audience at a Jummah. The perfect time to say something. Or even if you can't, say, hey, check out this organization, Heart. They're doing this. Check out Angelica, Those auntie, she's doing
They
this.
ain't gonna count me out in Juma, sis. I ain't them ain't gonna let the people in the congregation know that you know about Brother Auntie. That ain't gonna happen.
I'd have to agree with that one. I don't think that's gonna happen.
You never know. You never know.
But I do want to say that, like, to your point, Khadijah, about imams and leadership, I think it's also important to think about, for mosques and community centers, to think about how they're setting up their spaces, right? So thinking about visible signage, like what is visible to people about the different, particularly when you're talking about being a survivor, right? Like, you are safe here. Like, just having some visible signage, having like written materials available front and center if people want to learn more about pap smears, or if they want to learn more about breast cancer screening, or if they want to learn more about sexual abuse, like that information is available in a way that is accessible, in a way that is front and center and not like hidden in some corner, right? And then also, like, to Angelica's point about putting too much responsibility on imams, I think, it's really important for imams and leaders and community centers to start thinking about what partnerships look like, what intentional and strategic partnerships. There's so many great organizations, even mainstream ones, that are doing really good work. There's no need for an imam to feel like he has to do it on his own.
Yeah.
And, making an intentional, relationship, building an intentional relationship with, a violence prevention org that's local to you, or a sex ed org that's local to you, and building that relationship and saying, this is what's going to work for our community and not going to work for our community. How can we work together and bring this education and build this trust, right? So that there is if an imam does come, if somebody does come to an imam and say, hey, I just experienced this happened to me, then he has no doubt in his mind that if he sends them to this social services org, they will be taken care of, and they will be respected as a Muslim, and they will not be met with Islamophobic sort of responses and all of that. And I think that that's really important as well when people are thinking about the spaces that they're building.
So we have more questions. Y'all want to take more questions? What y'all want to do? I'm going to take a little time. We have...
I feel like we could talk for I also think we get so many questions because this speaks to the scarcity of women's voices on like this. I've seen Nadiah speak many places. I've seen Nadiah mobbed by people. I've done a workshop because people are just hungry for this information. So I think that it just speaks to the importance of centering women's voices in conversations like this. But we can't go till 10 o'clock.
It's past 10 o'clock
here. It's 8:13 here, so I'm thinking about.
Oh, okay. It's past 10 o'clock. Actually, but we actually only have one more question though.
Okay.
It's just one, and after that, I think if you have more
questions, oh, that's a goal.
Well, if you have other questions, just email either whoever you want to direct it to, Angelica, Nadiah, or myself, depending on what you're asking about. We'll have our information across the bottom of the screen in a minute. But we're going to wrap up because we could be here all night. But I appreciate all the questions for sure. Last one. So many conversations about sex, quote unquote, in the Muslim world, quote unquote. Go to pornography, but what are the connections between pornography and victimization through grooming? Woo! That is a loaded question. Layla. Hi, Layla.
Today.
Woo, who want to go with that
one? I'll just say that, okay, thank you. Read it to me after. I'll say that there is a connection between pornography and victimization through grooming, but we often don't think of the person that's consuming pornography as being a victim as well. Because porn is not sex. It's a performance. It's a movie. It's theater. People don't have sex like they have sex in porn films. So when that's your only access to sex education, because your community, your culture, your family won't talk to you about sex, you then are also victimized. It can be a self-inflicted, victimization, but you are still a victim of these jaded notions of sexuality. So I also know that there are people who are groomed for sex and sexual abuse because their abuser is using scripts and prompts that they see in pornography. But it all harkens back to this idea of having appropriate sex education. And, I have people who said, my father just gave me a movie and said, watch this. How is that proper? So I think that, while we talk about sex in the Muslim world and we rail against pornography, we also have to be honest with ourselves and say that in a lot of Muslim, communities, pornography is seen as the lesser of two evils. So it does not get a lot of shine like it should. I would rather them engage in pornography than engage in sex. But, one feeds into the other, and it can also have a violent outcome. So I think we have to look at pornography from like a 360 lens and how it's affecting both the person who is consuming it and could become a potential abuser and the person who might be consuming it and could become a potential victim.
And, I would also say even if you take abuse aside, I think it also, to your point about it being a performance and not real, it sets unhealthy expectations and can really compromise and create a lot of tension in what used to be a healthy sexual partnership is now, something that is sort of tainted by pornography. And I know that there's lots of research out there that talks about how your brain is actually rewired if you watch it enough, right? And so if you watch it enough, your brain actually gets rewired to desire that kind of sex or that kind of sexual activity that isn't real. And so how are you going to get that satisfaction in real life if your brain has sort of rewired itself to desire that? And so, the unhealthy expectations that it sets can really, really compromise, a very healthy partnership.
And I think that that's a non-gendered compromising, right? Because we always talk about porn and boys and porn and men, but women and girls consume just as much porn, and there are unhealthy expectations of their male partners, just like there are unhealthy expectations of female partners. So I think that's important. I think the conversation around unhealthy expectations is such an important one, but I only see it happen in male-centered space. We don't talk about it with women and how women, absorb these tropes, about what it means to have sex and how you're supposed to behave when you have sex in the male body, and just all other things that need to be unpacked. But I wanted to just make that for people who are listening and who are watching. Porn is not boys and men. Porn is human beings, engaged in the consumption of it.
Well, Layla left a comment here saying, "Yeah, I know how I do. I got you in one place." I had to ask. Mashallah. I want to thank you both, for spending time on a Thursday night to come here and speak on these topics. I think it's very informative. I always learn from you each time I speak to you both. I always learn from you, and you guys both are inspiring, especially to the Muslim community and even outside the Muslim community. And really sharing like these wisdoms and pearls, because we need to talk about this. I mean, we need to stop talking about how we can't talk about it and actually talk about it. So I appreciate it. Before we close, I wanted to see if you had any last words you wanted to provide. Nabila is saying, hey, we have a friend. He's like my daughter age. He's like, I'm ready. I'm not on the screen. And then Layla says, Jazakallah khair. So, any last words before we close?
I'm just really grateful to be in conversation with you, Khadijah and Angelica. It's always an honor. I always have a lot of fun. Could have gone all night, and I also recognize that it's also a Thursday night, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it's just been a long day. So, really grateful. Really encourage y'all to follow all of our social media, Rahma's social media, Village Auntie, Heart to Grow, and support us, invite us, praise us, brag about us.
Or don't. We're just going to do the work anyway.
Donate to our orgs.
Is what it is.
And I'm just going to put a plug in as a, can I say that I'm a board member of Rahma?
Of course.
You just did.
All right.
I'm going to put I'm going to put a plug in for Rahma and Heart. These are nonprofit organizations that serve our community. And I've worked in nonprofits for over 2 decades. It is difficult. It is so important that we support our own organizations. Even if it's $5, even if it's $5 a month, $60 a year, if you can give more, do more. But it's so important that we support these organizations. These are, they tick all the boxes. These are Muslim-led organizations, women-led organizations, people of color-led organizations that are located in urban areas and serving people who are disenfranchised and marginalized. So if you have not, you don't need it to be Giving Tuesday. Child, it can be Giving Thursday. It could
Friday,
be Monday. It could be Fund Me Friday. Listen, you'll make whatever day you need to make, but you need to donate to and support the work of Rahma and Heart, because they are truly doing, how they say in church, they're doing the Lord's work. They are fulfilling the mission of Islam in our communities, and they should be rewarded for that with our support. So thank you, ladies, for all that you do for our communities.
Nadiah, what's your launch code? I'm going to put you up here too. I know you have one active, right?
No, our launch code closed, but our website is just hearttogrow.org/donate.
Hearttogrow.org/donate. Thank you for the plug, Angelica. I really, really appreciate it. We have, here's Heart to Grow. Please go here as well and donate to support their work. And actually, Nadiah and I are doing some work together early next year around women and sexual health and Sister Angelica. So you can wait to stay tuned to hear more about that. But that's later on in life. But yeah, Rahma, our goal is trying to raise $5,000, and we raised about $3,000, a little over $3,000, almost $3,500. So please, check us out. Help us reach our goal by tomorrow, hopefully. Trying to do some work. So thank y'all so much. And I want to also put up my information as well. If you want to contact me at harrahma.org. Our website is harrahma.org as well. And then also we're on Instagram. And so, yeah, we will see y'all next week for our final episode of Man and COVID to the break. And y'all will see that to January, sometime February. I don't even know. But I need a break too. Nibila saying fund them. Okay, yes, Nibila. See, we got somebody supporting us in the audience. Waiting on that heart book. Yes, Nadiah, you have a heart book coming out. Tell the people about it real quick.
So we are hoping to release a book early next year, sometime next year, called The Sex Talk, A Muslim's Guide to Healthy Sex and Relationships. So it's going to be a book that's going to be a combination of half book, half workbook. So it's going to be, a book that's going to explore some, education 101. So like anatomy and contraception and STI information, but then also talking about what do healthy relationships look like? What is communication, giving prompts around reflection that you can do with yourself, with your partner, with your friends on some of these issues. So, yeah, super excited, and look out for it next year.
Yes, and with that night. Well, thank you everybody for hanging into the end. We still have some viewers here. Thank y'all for being really engaging with us and asking these amazing questions, even though some of them were heavy. Still needed questions. So we'll see y'all next time. Again, y'all have any other questions, contact either of us or all of us. And y'all have a good night.
Thank you.